you may have been curious about. Now, beer is one of the oldest and most widely consumed alcoholic drink in the world, and the third most popular drink after water and tea. Now, have you ever wondered how it is made? Nissie Imano takes us through all the stages in this premiere episode of The Process.
Barley, yeast, hops, and water, the raw material in beer making.
The malted barley comes from the silo, comes through this conveyor to the stoner. These others remove the dust, basically cleaning the malted barley.
Most of the beer manufacturing process is a closed process with no contact for zero chance of contamination.
This whole process is controlled from this central point.
The first step in the beer making process is mashing. Mashing is the combining of grist and water.
What happens here is conversion of starch to simple fermentable sugars like maltose.
The mixture is heated for 2 hours, causing the natural enzymes in the malt to break down starches, converting them into sugars, which will eventually become alcohol.
It is boiled for like an hour, and after boiling for the bitterness, because that will give you the bitterness in the final product. Another one is sterilizing.
The next step is lautering. This is where the liquid extract is separated from solids, also called the spent grains, separating the wort from spent grain. The lauter turn separates the wort from the mash solids. The solids from the mash settle on the bottom and form a filter for the wort.
The particles emanating from boiling is separated here.
The third stage in brewing is sparging, where the remaining spent grain, which consists of grain husks and particles, are rinsed out with heated water to get as much of the sugars as possible from the remaining grain for the wort. One batch of the liquid extract in this case is 30,000 liters. The wort is then sterilized through a boiling process which halts enzyme activity and condenses the liquid. During the boiling, hops are added.
The bitter substance, which is called the alpha acids, so it is extracted by boiling.
The qualities of aroma, taste, and bitterness that hops impart to beer depend on at what point they are added. Hops can be added early in the boiling for bittering, with more time boiled resulting in more bitterness. They can be added mid-boil for flavor or late boil for flavoring and aroma. Hops can also be added at stages after the boil.
It's added, but the dosing point is below this tank.
Next, a heat exchanger is used to reduce the wort to the temperature desired for fermentation.
At this point now, you are now ready to cool the liquid and take it to start fermenting.
Wort is transferred to a fermentation tank and the yeast is added. This stage is the primary fermentation, the conversion of alcohol and carbon dioxide that lead to an ale or a lager, depending on the type of yeast used.
You filter the beer and make it that sparkling clear.
Once yeast has been pitched at proper temperature, the beer is generally maintained. The process of the yeast converting sugars to alcohol generates heat and is monitored closely by brewers. During the conditioning process, the beer will mature and be smooth, and byproducts of the fermentation will diminish. The conditioning process can last from 1 to 6 weeks and sometimes even more. We move to the bottling section of the brewery, where recycled bottles are brought in and cleaned. This machine cleans 40,000 bottles in an hour. Then the inspection process begins, where the good bottles pass and the ones with chips and faults are rejected.
This is injection.
The bottles are then dried and recycled into new bottles that will now be filled with a fresh batch of beer. Next, the beer is crowned or capped with a bottle top. The beer is then pasteurized. Once the beer has fermented, it must be carbonated. This involves adding carbon dioxide to a container under high pressure, forcing it to be absorbed into the beer. This is done to improve shelf life.
And in the process is what we call carbonation. You add more carbon dioxide in it.
At every stage, the manufacturer scoops the beer for quality tests to confirm desired taste and acidity levels. The bottles are then filled with beer and capped and then sent to labeling. After the labels have been put, the bottles are passed in the Kenya Revenue Authority verification machine to be stamped as having passed all quality control tests and found fit for human consumption. The labeling goes hand in hand with counting and with verification. Once the labeling has been done, the beers are then packed into crates that are carried by cranes to the factory store and into waiting trucks that will then transport the beer to the wholesale and retail markets. Nissie Imano for the process.